what a ketogenic diet does, it actually mimics probably a metabolic state that we're in very early in life. There's some interesting evidence that, especially if the mother is on a ancestral high fat diet, that babies feeding on breast milk are in light ketosis because of the macronutrient ratios of breast milk. And this is the time of our life when we have the most new neurons and brain
Mm.
cells and nervous tissue developing.
Today, I'm pleased to introduce to you my special guest, Jen Donovan. Jen Donovan is a tension and trauma releasing exercises provider, nutritional therapy practitioner, and certified gut and psychology syndrome practitioner. Jen completely rebuilt her life and career as a result of her experience with severe chronic illness. After finding no answers from conventional medical approaches, she took matters into her own hands and with the help of key mentors, found another path to health. With her diverse training in mental health, nervous system regulation, ancestral nutrition, and the gut microbiome, she now works full-time in a thriving private practice helping people around the world find a holistic approach to their complex health experiences. I really enjoyed my conversation with Jen, and I think that her approach to supporting her clients with their severe autoimmune illnesses or what have you has real application to how we might approach recovery from binge eating disorder as well. Without further ado, here's my conversation with Jen. Jennifer Donovan from Whole Body Healing. Thank you so much for being here today.
Yes, thank you for the invite, Christina. I'm really excited for this conversation.
Of course. So, I understand you were a trauma therapist and you have expanded into whole body healing. You've expanded into nutrition, gut health. Can you tell me and tell anyone who might be listening or viewing this on the YouTube channel, how did that transition happen? What inspired that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I really in a million years never thought I would be doing this kind of nutritional or holistic health coaching work. Psychology and mental health and sociology. These were my passions when I was a young adult and going to college. And I really had a belief that people's context, people's environment really made up who they were. I just didn't believe this medical model of mental health that people just had genetic problems. And so that led me into the world of trauma therapy and trauma recovery, with the idea being, well, if experiences in your life have led you to the mental health crises you're experiencing, then we need to basically go back and heal those traumas. And that's the solution. And it was effective for a lot of people, definitely. But I found more and more there were those cases of people who they were doing all the work. It's not like they needed to just therapy harder, right? They were
Yeah.
coming to sessions, they were putting in the time, they were trying to implement what we were working on, and it just felt like there was something in their body that was just stopping them from gaining the kind of mental health that was their goal. And so I had these stubborn cases that I wasn't sure what to do with. And then at the same time, I experienced my own health crisis. So I ended up developing a very severe autoimmune immune dysregulation condition called mast cell activation syndrome. And a lot of the symptoms of this condition actually are psychiatric. There's a lot of anxiety, panic, intrusive thoughts that come along with this condition, as well as a lot of physical symptoms, of course. But I ended up going on this journey to find natural ways to support my body to heal from this condition. And the really wild thing is that when I started making drastic changes to my nutrition and lifestyle practices, the first symptoms that went away for me were mental health symptoms that had been stubborn through my whole life. I mean, almost everyone, right, who goes into a field, like, has also had personal struggles in that field, right?
Right.
That's just kinda how
Yeah.
these things work.
Yes.
So, I had had my
Right.
own mental health struggles and, definitely had seen improvement by doing all the trauma work, all the nervous system work, that I was doing in my practice, but there were still things that were stubborn for me too. And so the first things that ameliorated when I started making these dramatic nutritional changes were my mental health symptoms, and this just blew me away. I just started looking at the world so differently. And I started realizing, oh my goodness, are people with these so called treatment resistant mental health issues, maybe actually struggling with metabolic disorders, nutritional deficiencies, gut imbalances, etc. Not that the trauma and nervous system work isn't important, it's incredibly important. And I actually still do that work in my practice. But I think a lot of the times we're missing a puzzle piece.
I think that that is super interesting. I don't know if you know this about me, but I'm actually a PhD candidate in somatic psychology, which really embraces
Oh, wow.
the reciprocal relationship in mind and body. And so I'm totally on board with if therapy or some type of talk therapy only gets you so far, what other avenues can we explore? Like, what about
Yeah.
embodiment? What about nourishing ourselves with food in a different way? What about like
Yeah.
literally touching ourselves in a different way, like focusing on nervous system regulation, focusing on circadian rhythm? And I know that you also incorporate a lot of these mind body practices, but I think that it's super interesting that you went on this journey yourself and that you found that sometimes the things that are manifesting as a psychological condition can actually be impacted by something that can be traditionally considered like a physical intervention or like something that's
Yeah.
really just that other people would consider, oh, it's your body, but actually it has an impact on your mind and your spirit and your emotional state as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. And there's so many people out there that really think, well, unless I have an explicit, digestive issue, then why would food matter? And even then, sometimes doctors will tell you that food doesn't matter it comes to
Right.
digestive disorders, which is just wild to me. You could possibly think that. But even so, even when you start to acknowledge, food, yes, has an effect on our physiology, we usually think of it as very literal, like, oh, like where is the food going through our digestive tract? So it must only affect that area. But like you're pointing out, our entire body is interrelated. Like one part of our body is not separate from another part of our body. So of course, anything happening in our digestive tract is also going to affect the nervous system and the brain.
I was doing some stalking of your Instagram, your website,
Yeah.
before our call today. And somewhere, I think it was from your book, Rebuild Yourself, it had mentioned
Oh, yes.
the ketogenic diet. And the
Mhm.
ketogenic diet, it was somehow indicating the ketogenic diet as being helpful for nervous system regulation and resetting the gut brain axis. And I'm wondering what sort of nutrients do you think are most important for mental health, for keeping our nervous system regulated? And do you still advocate a ketogenic approach?
Absolutely. And I want to be clear that I don't think everyone who has a mental health symptom needs to go on a strict ketogenic diet. There are a lot of different steps along the way that we can try. And some people need to make just a few minor changes in their nutrition, maybe even just taking out some top inflammatory foods that are causing systemic neuroinflammation, right? So there's a lot of different ways to go about this. It's not a one size fits all. But certainly for some of my more severe cases, especially people with things that are seen to be kind of lifelong debilitating conditions, things like major depression, bipolar, even psychosis, and even things that get into the cognitive realm, severe brain fog, memory issues, learning disabilities, things like this. A ketogenic diet can be a life changer. Absolutely. So yes, definitely still advocate this in my clients. I have had clients who have put these kinds of symptoms completely into remission without medications. And that I think should be like we should be screaming this from the rooftops. I mean that like these kinds of conditions that have been seen in the mental health field as potentially genetic, potentially, incurable, right? As
Hmm.
needing lifelong medication management. The best you could hope for is this condition being well managed. And I have people who have experienced their brains completely differently long term through utilizing this intervention. And I can definitely talk about the science of why that likely is. I don't know where you want to go from here.
Of course, yeah. If you could briefly touch on it, that would be totally welcome.
Yeah, so what a ketogenic diet does, it actually mimics probably a metabolic state that we're in very early in life. There's some interesting evidence that, especially if the mother is on a ancestral high fat diet, that babies feeding on breast milk are in light ketosis because of the macronutrient ratios of breast milk. And this is the time of our life when we have the most new neurons and brain
Mm.
cells and nervous tissue developing. And we see this also in clinical trials for with adults, that when you are in a ketogenic state, there's basically an increased incidence of what is called neurogenesis, right? Which is again that production of new nerve cells. This is also a state that you get into when you are fasting, and there's many people that find, wow, if I do intermittent fasting, or if I, spend a day fasting or a couple days fasting, or even during many religious traditions. I mean, almost all major religions have periods of
Mhm.
structured fasting incorporated into them, and people will say, wow, I feel so good. Right, like I feel so clear, I feel so happy, I feel so bright. And so it can definitely make a difference even for the average person. But basically what's happening is your body is taking the energy that it would have been reserving for other kinds of maintenance processes, and you're in this either true fasting state or pseudo fasting state, which is basically what a ketogenic diet is. And you are the body is taking that energy and it's instead stimulating all this new growth and repair of nervous tissue, including the brain. So um what happens is that people have a kind of a metabolic reset, where their body is now learning how to produce energy from this really clean fuel source, and that is ketone bodies. Now again, if you're fasting, your body will start to burn your body fat and get into this state. The problem is that you can only fast so much before it starts to negatively impact your health, and for some people it may not even really be a good idea or healthy if they have a history of restrictive eating, or if they um maybe are already malnourished, or they have a delicate hormonal system. There's
Mhm.
many reasons why fasting may not be appropriate for everyone. And so what's beautiful about a ketogenic diet is it can give you very similar benefits, but you're eating all this very nutrient dense food. It's not a calorie restricted diet at all. In fact, you can eat very high calorie eating this way. But because your body is getting this really clean fuel from the fat that you are eating, and it's in this state of neurogenesis, it can completely change how your brain and nervous system function.
It sounds like to me you're not necessarily pushing super high fat type of ketogenic diet, but just eliminating the ultra processed foods, having a higher proportion of proteins and fats. That alone is going to have a huge impact on someone's mental and physical health. Am I right there?
Well, absolutely. And actually, it really depends who I'm working with. So I really try to take a bio individual approach. So if someone's coming to me and they're saying, I'm just kind of anxious and tired, then yeah, we probably can do a pretty minor intervention depending on what they're already eating, and we can see a lot of improvement. Let's see if we can take out some of those top inflammatory foods, which are often things like gluten, corn, soy, things that are most commonly causing an inflammatory response in sensitive people. Let's see if we can increase the nutrient density of your diet, get you some more nutrients, see if we can get your blood sugar a little more balanced, through having a higher protein and fat to carbohydrate ratio in your diet. And yeah, a lot of people will just have incredible benefit from this kind of intervention. But other people who are coming to me, and I often will work with people who have a history of very severe mental illness, and maybe neurological symptoms on top of that. And so, in that case, this is where some of these more intensive interventions, like a therapeutic
Mhm.
ketogenic diet, really
Mhm.
can be, like I said, a life changer. I will say that a lot of people think they have done keto because they went on a like weight loss keto kind of fad style diet that
Right.
they downloaded, somewhere. And I just will say that many people will benefit from those kinds of diets because usually you are lowering the amount of inflammatory foods you're eating, you're getting your blood sugar balanced. But most people who are doing those kinds of kind of mainstream keto diets are not actually in a metabolic state of therapeutic ketosis. And so I think it's really important to distinguish that working with someone that knows how to do a, again, therapeutic ketogenic diet for the purpose of really rebooting your brain and nervous system is different than just kind of cutting your carbs for the goal of weight loss.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love that you're on the ball and I love that you offer a really bio-individual approach and that you are very familiar. I can tell that you're very familiar working on a range from a minor intervention to a therapeutically ketogenic diet for someone who has very severe symptoms. So I would love to hear what are some of your favorite grounding and soothing techniques because my history is binge eating, and
Yeah,
that's the main audience of the people listening is people struggling with binge eating. There's oftentimes a dissociative element there. And so a grounding
absolutely.
technique would be really helpful. So I'm wondering if you have just like a favorite one or two like practices or something that you feel like really heavy hitters.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I'll just say quickly on the topic of binge eating, I mean, very often there is a protein or fat deficiency in the diet that is triggering these kinds of behaviors. Sometimes there really is just a physical intervention needed where if your
Hmm.
body doesn't feel like it's gotten enough fat or protein over the day, it will basically trigger your brain to just want to eat everything and anything to try
Yeah.
to make up that depletion. And so I have definitely seen people's binge eating improve just from some really simple dietary education around like here's actually how much protein and fat you should be getting in your diet, which is just not it's not commonly eaten in the mainstream kind of standard American diet, but it's also not commonly eaten in what is kind of the mainstream version of a healthy diet, which is this kind of eat like a rabbit model, right? Like that's actually going to trigger your binge eating worse in a lot of cases. And then people feel like, oh, I just can't eat healthy, but it's like, well, you actually haven't gotten the proper education of what a satiating healthy diet actually looks like.
Well, it's so depathologizing. I mean, to just say like, "Hey, maybe you just need to eat more protein and fat." That's not. I mean, obviously, we're not disregarding people's trauma history or any other factors that may be involved. But for some
Yeah.
people, getting enough protein and fat really makes a difference. And there's so much power there and so much depathologizing there instead of being like, something's wrong with you. You need to change your life. You need to change your relationships. It could be you just need to eat more protein and fat, and that can really make a difference.
Right. Yeah, your body is trying to give you a signal that it needs something it's not getting. So that's always like the first step I would take with someone coming to me struggling with binge eating. But I want to answer your original question because, and then as you brought up, there is obviously also a really big stress, trauma, emotional component for people that really can't be ignored. And if you have, um, unresolved issues on this end of the spectrum, like even if you're literally only eating like steak and bacon, you could still binge eat, right?
Yeah.
If you have
Yeah.
enough of a addictive or compulsive thing going on.
Absolutely.
In that case, we really need to look at the function that the food is serving. Very often, it's going to be for the purpose of self-soothing and distraction. I really take approach of your again, try to depathologize. It's not wrong what you're trying to do. You're trying to use the most powerful distractions and soothing mechanisms we have, which are our sensory experiences, right? Our nervous
Mhm.
system is always looking into its environment to pick up on, what are the sensory stimuli going on, and that help your nervous system know if you're in danger or you're safe, etc. Yeah, and so if your body has gotten in a state where it's relying primarily on the sense of taste for that soothing aspect. And of course, food gets a little more complicated because it's really tied into our dopamine reward system too. So it's particularly easy to get kind of sucked down that rabbit hole once you start. But so the point is that your body is still doing the right thing in the sense that it's trying to use a sensory input for soothing
Mhm.
and grounding. And so the idea is that's not wrong, but we need to find an alternative. And a lot of people actually really neglect their other senses when it comes to soothing and grounding. And so often what I'll encourage people to do is if you're feeling disconnected, overwhelmed, anxious, whatever it is, whatever emotional experience it is that triggers your binge eating, um, yes, look for soothing, but what about smells, sounds, things you can touch, ways you can move your body, right? There are a lot of really simple interventions that bring in your other senses that can help give your nervous system what it was looking for in the binge eating in the first place, but it's not going to be as damaging to your physical or mental health.
I have this big cheesy smile on my face right now, and the reason why is my whole dissertation is about sensory interventions
Oh, wow.
for urges to binge eat. And so that's kind of like my thesis is that if we interpret binge
Wow.
eating as a somatic experience where we're seeking sensory input from the eating, from the food, if we can instead, provide that sensory input in another way, let's say from proprioception, from touch, from our other senses, what happens. And so that's what my dissertation is exploring. So as you're talking, I'm like,
Oh
yes,
my
yes,
goodness.
yes, yes, yes,
That's
yes.
so cool, Christina. Oh my gosh. I love
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. So I'm right on board with what you're saying. I totally think that that is a great way to consider it. And as you know, you being a trauma therapist, just thinking about binge eating, if we think about it in a not necessarily as a in a sensory way, but in a way we are losing grounding with ourselves, we're dissociating. Oftentimes the grounding that we do is orienting through our senses. In
Yes,
trauma therapy, it's often like feel your feet on the ground and look around the room, and it's like really using our senses to ground ourselves in our body. And so yeah, the body is a really potent place to be, so that we're not just like in la la land in our mind going who knows where.
absolutely. Yeah. And in my book I give some examples of things that many people find like grounding and soothing with each of those senses. So there's definitely, if you're like, I have no idea, there's some places to start in terms of like sounds, like, many people find bird sounds or, ocean waves or kind of nature sounds to be very calming. For smells, there are essential oils that have been shown to have uh, anxiety reducing properties, especially things like lavender and clary sage and bergamot. So these are places to start, just to try to
Mm-hmm.
have that experience of what is it like to kind of bring my nervous system down using some of these sensory inputs. But ultimately, you have to just self experiment. You have to see it as like this exploration around, I wonder what makes my nervous system feel calm and safe and soothed specifically, because sometimes people are surprised. Like maybe it's something that they didn't expect. I remember when I was very ill and in a very dysregulated state, I was experimenting with this and I realized that I found it very soothing to hear conversation in the background, like to just
Mm.
have like voices kind of talking in the background. But I didn't want to get too distracted by like trying to listen to what people were saying. And so what I would do is I would turn on like foreign language lessons that I could just
Mm.
free stream like on YouTube, and I would just have
Yeah.
conversation in a foreign language just playing in the background while I was trying to like regulate my nervous system. And like that's not, I mean, that's such a random niche thing that I discovered was super soothing for me, but it worked really well. And so I'm sure many people listening will find some interesting random thing that is specifically soothing to their nervous system.
That's so inspiring. Yeah, I think it is super important. That's a very important thing to emphasize is that we have to find what's specific to our nervous system, whether it is finding something that's soothing or finding something that is energizing or whatever is suitable to the circumstance at hand, whatever we need. We actually need to test it for ourselves because what might be soothing for one person might not be. Because for you, putting on a foreign language conversation was that perfect amount, like it was some sound but it didn't draw you in, and that was soothing. For someone else that might be
Mm.
really annoying and that might be
Totally.
irritating. Some people, I love a hard touch, like I really love like a super hard
Mm,
touch. Some people might find it too much, so it's really important to find the sensory stimuli that is soothing for you, that works for you. In your book Rebuild Yourself, you also talk about befriending. I'm wondering if you could just briefly explain what is
yeah.
befriending.
So this is the first module, like the first curriculum piece that I always have clients work on when they come to see me. Because over and over again, I would see people. sometimes with very complex chronic illnesses, mental health issues, physical health issues, etc. And they would be doing all the right things. Right? They would be, working on their diet, working on their daily routine. They would even be doing like the nervous system regulation pieces, like, okay, I'm doing my sensory self soothing, I'm doing my, visualization practice that I teach people, things like this. They would come to sessions with me and they'd be like, visibly agitated, like, why isn't this stuff working? Like, why am I not getting better?
Mm.
And I started realizing that it was because people were still in this deep internal conflict where they were at odds with their own bodies because they were seeing their symptoms, their illness, everything they were dealing with as the enemy. And that enemy was living inside their own body. And so that gives an unresolvable conflict, right? Like you can't ultimately get away from your own body. So much as sometimes we'd like to, like we
Yeah,
can't, right? We're in it.
right.
What I realized is that people were really seeing their bodies and their symptoms and whatever diagnoses they had as the enemy, as opposed to what they really are, which is a way your body is trying to communicate its needs to you. So I have a very, very deep belief, which I've, you know, um, really tried to emphasize in my work, that every symptom is just a communication device. And any pattern of symptoms, which is which is what becomes our diagnosis or our condition, is just the way the body is showing you what underlying imbalances it is dealing with. And so this is relevant for physical, mental, neurological, whatever kind of symptoms you're dealing with, because the body communicates through bodily experiences, right? I mean, I wish you could just say, like, hey,
Write a
hey
report.
brain, or hey nervous tissue, or yeah, hey lungs, like what's going on? What's the symptom about? What are you dealing with? Unfortunately, it doesn't work like that most of the time. So we have to learn to interpret symptoms. And we have to see our symptoms as basically the language of the body. And many people are raised in such disconnection to their body that they don't know how to speak that language. So you can't really successfully learn a foreign language if you hate the people or the culture language that you're trying
Right,
to learn, like, it's not gonna
right.
work, right? So similarly, like, there's no way that you can learn this language of your body if you hate your body or you hate your illness. And so what I try to teach people is whatever symptoms you're having, you have to learn how to befriend. Now, I try to give people a break. I try not to say like, "Oh, you have to love your symptoms or you have to love your body." Like, I think it's great when
Right.
people are able to get there, but that might be too far a leap for some people. And the reality is sometimes we can make friends with something that or someone that, we kind of get irritated by or frustrated with, we can still be
Yeah,
like friendly,
yeah,
with things.
yeah.
And so it's okay. It doesn't mean you have to be like wholeheartedly, happy that you're having some kind of debilitating symptom or you've been diagnosed with this really serious condition, but you can build a relationship with it that is friendly and understanding, and being able to talk to yourself like, I do get what you're trying to do for me, body. Like, I do get that you're trying to communicate with me. I understand you are trying to tell me what imbalances I have by giving me these symptoms. And that opens the door that now you can have this more clear communication. And when people start with this befriending, they start to get to this place where they can read the signals of their body more clearly. They start to realize, oh, when I do this more, I start to have this symptom more. Oh, when I bring this in, I notice this symptom gets less. And it becomes less of a like a gripping experience of just trying to push all your symptoms away at all costs, but more this intricate dance that you're doing with your body trying to figure out what it needs.
I think that is such an interesting perspective. So thanks for explaining that. I had never considered how important it is to not hate the symptom and consider the symptoms like a friend so that you can start to have a dialogue and start to understand, and how it would be difficult to learn the language if you were in a place where you hated the country and hated the people. So
Yeah.
that is a really interesting reframe there. It's really interesting to reframe the symptoms instead of resisting all of it, to change the mindset to
Yeah.
curiosity and sort of like, empathy for oneself. Okay, I'm struggling right now. I'm experiencing
Yes.
this and this is difficult. What is going on? Like, was there something that I
Yeah.
ate? What were the inputs that are going on related to stress or other things going on, so that I can take responsibility in certain ways and maybe shift things so that I can improve and my life can improve, instead of being like, fuck, I hate that this sucks. Like, I hate all of this, and like close yourself off to what learning and growth may and progress may occur.
Yeah, and I will just add that some people might be feeling like, okay, well, that's all well and good if I just have, oh, like a mild ache or pain, here or there, but like, oh my gosh, I'm really suffering. How does this apply to me? And I would say, as hard as it may be to see right now, it actually means it applies to you even more. Like when I had this realization, I was at a point where I was mostly unable to work. I was mostly stuck in my house. I was having, 10 to 20 debilitating symptoms every single day. I was at a point where I was very, very ill. And what I realized was that my body was more desperate than ever to get my attention and communicate with me. That's what was going on. It's not that it was malfunctioning. It was like, well, you haven't listened for the last 25 years, so I guess this is what it's going to take to get your attention.
Thanks so much for breaking that down. That sounds like a really important element of your approach, and I can understand why that would be the first module that you would incorporate when you're working with a new client. In your book, Rebuild Yourself, I noticed you also talked about movement, and I'm wondering if you could just share a little bit about how you incorporate that or highlight that in your work with clients.
This is overlooked a lot, honestly, both in the mental health world, but also in the, more holistic health world. And I'm not talking about movement in the sense of, exercising to get buff kind of movement. It's not so much that. It's about actually having more functional movement patterns and a properly aligned joint and skeletal system. The reason this is important is that the main superhighway of communication that happens in our nervous system happens up the spinal cord in the vagus nerve that connects, from our pelvic floor all the way through our digestive tract. It connects to all our major organs and then goes up into the brainstem and then wraps around and comes into the face and connects to all our main sensory organs in our face. This is where most of our autonomic nervous system functions are modulated from. And when we have poor posture, that vagus nerve is impinged on. And so the communication is not happening as accurately. And so usually what that looks like is that, chin jutting forward posture, that hunched
Mm-hmm.
shoulder posture
Mm-hmm.
that we all do when we're on our phones and on our laptops, right? And so it impinges on the vagus nerve. It means your nervous system isn't able to communicate as well with itself. And it also impinges on your ability to have true diaphragmatic breathing. Most people are breathing into their chest and not into the deepest part of their diaphragm. And even people who are like, well, I'm trying to belly breathe, a lot of times what they're doing is they're just kind of pushing their belly out when they're breathing, thinking that that's, what you're supposed to do. But our diaphragm is supposed to expand in three directions actually when we breathe. So it's like really unlocking a lot of tight muscles that people tend to have in their abdominal area. And again, when we're in that forward head posture, you can even feel it. If you do that for yourself right now, you'll notice like, oh, wow, my whole diaphragm collapses when I'm in that position. And a properly oxygenated nervous system is essential for a properly functioning nervous system. So these are just basic things, just like the nutrients, the metabolism I was talking about. Like you can't expect to have a well functioning brain and nervous system if you're not getting enough energy into your nervous system, if your nerves aren't repairing at a proper rate, like when we were talking about nutrition earlier. But similarly, if your nervous system is not communicating properly to itself, if it's not getting enough oxygen in, you can't expect it to be functioning optimally, right? It's a lot to ask, right? The kind of movement work that we do at Whole Body Healing is basically helping people get the muscle connection they need to sustainably hold themselves in a proper posture. So it's
Cool.
not, again, it's not like about bodybuilding, right? Or any
Mm-hmm.
kind of
Mm-hmm.
endurance training. I mean, that's great if you want to do that, that's fine. But it's really about like, do you just have the back, core, and glute muscle strength to hold yourself up properly so that you can breathe fully and your vagus nerve can work fully.
I love it. Okay, two more things about your book. So it also talks about mindset. Tell us a little bit about mindset.
So this happens in two parts. So the first part is really the befriending, right? In my opinion, like there's no point in embarking on a big mindset overhaul until you've done that basic work of befriending your body, befriending your
Mm-hmm.
symptoms.
That
So
makes
you have
sense.
that more open, curious perspective, right? So that's kind of the prerequisite. And really, what I'm asking is for people to get from a negative state to at least a neutral state, right? Again, it doesn't have to be your best friend, but it's at least someone that you can have a friendly conversation with, right?
Yeah.
So you're at
Yeah.
least at neutral. Now, when we get into deeper mindset work, now we're taking that to the next level. So at that point, we are actually taking things from negative, or sorry, from neutral to positive. It's basically just the next step up the corridor. And
Mm-hmm.
what that looks like is actually being able to bring in experiences like compassion and open-heartedness, gratitude, laughter, right? All of these things that ultimately make up the most powerful aspects of our human experience and what our prefrontal cortex, right, that like front human part of our brain is capable of doing. And many people who have dealt with chronic illness, including mental illness, that part of their brain is pretty shut off. And usually it's shut off for very valid reasons. Like people have experienced incredible amounts of trauma, stress, dysfunctional or abusive relationships, all sorts of things. And so when you experience these recurrent hardships in your life, what happens is that the activity in the front of your brain lessens and actually shrinks. The matter shrinks, and the amygdala, or the kind of limbic system, that emotional um, part of your brain that is activated when you get triggered, that grows and that activity increases, and the actual physical structure of that part of your brain actually grows as well. They've done these studies on people with PTSD, and brain scans, and actually seen these changes that happen in the brain. So very valid reasons why this develops. The problem is that then you can get stuck in this feedback loop where even if maybe you're in a situation where now you are able to be safe and to heal and even start thriving, now your brain structure is set up in a way that makes it really, really difficult. And so basically what we have to do is we have to retrain your brain to see the positive and the good in your life and in the world and in yourself and in other people. And so that's where these practices, like we do a lot of compassion and open-hearted meditation. We do a lot of gratitude and forgiveness practices. All of these things are incredibly powerful. They do just start to, again, change the structure of your brain, the opposite of what I was just saying. Right now, we're bringing more blood flow into that front of your brain, and now your confirmation bias is going the other way. You're actually more likely to see positive and good things in your life. The issue is that a lot of people try to do those kinds of practices and it's just like nothing, right? Like they can't even like get a glimpse of what that might feel like, because they've been stuck in this loop for so long. So again, that's why I always start with that befriending of like, let's get you to neutral, right? And at that point, once you feel like, yeah, okay, I'm starting to feel a little more neutral about my body and about my life and about my symptoms, then we start to elevate. So that's really where that mindset work comes in.
There's just so much in what you say that just resonates so deeply because I really feel that there's value in playfulness, in celebration, in gratitude, in a lot of things that you mentioned. So I'm just so on board with these elements. I feel like your approach is just so thoughtful and so comprehensive. So I love that. The last question I have is about your book. I saw that you mentioned brain exercise. I'm wondering if you could tell me about brain exercise. I mean, all of this stuff all interweaves, obviously. Like befriending is a definite reframe, doing engaging in meditation, which causes change in the prefrontal cortex. That is a form of brain exercise in and of itself. But specifically, brain exercises, is there something else that's a whole separate module? I'm just curious. Tell me about brain exercise as it relates to whole body healing.
Totally. Yeah. So brain exercise is really what we call the practical application of all this mindset work that we're talking about. Because a lot of times people will hear what I'm talking about, in terms of the mindset and shifting the perspective and trying to notice different things and understand things differently. And they'll be like, that's great, but like these patterns are so ingrained. Like, how do I actually practice that? And that's when it comes to looking at it as a brain exercise, right? And I always tell people, if this, what I'm talking about, feels so inaccessible, like I don't even know where to begin. Think of it like if you were to start out going to the gym. Like, you wouldn't expect to go to the gym after you had never worked out, you know, put on 300-pound dumbbells and just start doing deadlifts. Right? Like, you would
That would be
never think
hard.
that that was the yeah,
Uh,
it just would not be realistic at all. You'd probably actually really hurt yourself, right? And you never wanna go back. So I think people need to treat these kinds of mindset shifts in a similar way, and it's the idea that, um, we have had people start out trying to do these practices for, like, 30 seconds at a time
Absolutely.
because that's
Hmm.
all they could wrap their head around, it's like at that point it's like so much of a shift, and it sometimes it like physically hurts in your brain to try to do these practices. Like, we'll lead people through some of these brain exercises. Sometimes they'll be like, ow, does it hurt? And it's like, yeah, you're not used to having blood in that part of your brain. So there's that, but then also it's like it really can bump up against like years of stories and years of beliefs, and years of trauma. And that's a lot. People do a lot of emotional processing through this whole process. So when people come to work in our programs, like, we also help them learn how to do like EFT tapping, and we do kind of some emotional processing sessions because, yeah, there's just so much that gets brought up to the surface through this. But yeah, we basically call it brain exercise because we want people to understand that these are specific practices that we want you to do on a daily basis, but that it's a kind of a progressive practice, right? That, we do a little bit longer and a little more in depth over time until you're at a place where you feel like you can sit and meditate for 20 minutes, or you can have this like open-hearted, compassionate experience, where you feel in like total gratitude for your life. Like, that's an advanced practice. Ultimately, like, that's an advanced exercise, and we need to acknowledge that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's a very, now that you describe it like that, I think that's a very compassionate way of describing exercises like
Yeah.
meditation or having a mindset shift as calling it exercise, because it can acknowledge that doing it in and of itself, even 30 seconds, can be really challenging. And if we can just start small, we will work our way up over time. Okay, Jen, I have asked you so many questions. You have been so thorough in answering everything. Thank you so much. If people want to find you, where can they stalk you, find you, follow you, ask you questions, be your client?
Absolutely. So, yeah, I am very active on social media. I'm Whole Body Healing with Jen on all platforms. That's Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, all the things. And that's
Wow.
Jen just with one N. Yes. um, yeah, I post most days. So, yeah, I try to get a lot of free content out there. I know that, sometimes the free content is all that's accessible for some people. So I definitely like people to have as much content for free as they can. But then, of course, if they want to go deeper, I do have pre-recorded versions of all my programs up on my website, wholebodyhealingwithjen.com. I specifically specialize in working with people with mast cell activation syndrome, histamine intolerance, autoimmune conditions, and all the nervous system and psychiatric weirdness that tends to come with those kinds of conditions. So, I specifically tend to work with people who have really high sensitivities, like all sorts of allergies, people who feel like they're allergic to the world. That's really those are my people. So, if you want to work specifically with me, I have a 6-month intensive program called Immune Resilience. That is kind of my flagship program. And so people are welcome to go on my website, apply for that, see what it's all about. And then I also do one-time assessments with people if they just want to dip their toes in. I also have a couple coaches that work under me as assistants that I've trained, who also have options for taking one-on-one clients if their schedule is more accessible for folks.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing all the information and letting us know where we can find you. It's been such a pleasure having you on today. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.